a different person now, and nothing could change that. "Are you ready, Miss Darrow?" a man at her door asked. "Wait a minute," said Anne. "Here he is! Kong!" shouted the happy Mr. Denham. The people jumped when they saw Kong. Some almost screamed. Jack stood in the back of the theater, and he understood. He remembered the first time for him, too. Kong sat on the floor, with his hands and legs in heavy chains. Jack felt a little sad for him. Then some men pulled on the chains from above and pulled Kong to his feet. Again, some people almost screamed. "Now you will meet Mr. Bruce Baxter," Carl said. "Mr. Baxter saved the young woman from this dangerous giant." The people loved the famous actor and shouted his name loudly. Then Carl told them about the wild islanders. When he finished, girls in strange clothes came out and danced in front of Kong. The giant gorilla wasn't interested. Jack watched the dancers, but he didn't like them. A man next to him said, "We learned something about Carl on that trip. When he loves something, he ruins it." Jack turned his head and saw Preston. He was right. "Now you can meet our beautiful young woman," Carl shouted happily. "Miss Anne Darrow." Jack felt sick. How can she do this? He thought. He remembered the trip back to New York when she didn't speak to anybody. A woman in a long white dress came out and stood on a bed of rocks in front of Kong. The gorilla looked carefully at her. "This is strange," Jack thought. "Doesn't he remember Anne?" Then Kong's eyes opened wide and shone angrily at this strange woman. He roared and roared. Jack understood. "That's not Anne." He turned to Preston and said, "Where is she?" In another theater, Anne danced with other girls in long white dresses. She tried hard on this night not to think about Skull Island, but she couldn't stop thinking about Jack. "He loved me, I know that, but he couldn't tell me. Why? Something wasn't right between us. But what?" Jack asked again, "Where is she?" "I have no idea," answered Preston. "Carl wanted her to do this, but she said no. So he found another girl." Men from the newspapers took a lot of photos of the woman and the gorilla. Kong didn't like the lights from the cameras, and he roared angrily. "Come, Denham!" shouted one of these men. "We want a photo of you with the gorilla." Carl pulled Baxter into the photo with him. "Here's your story, boys," he said. "This man saved the beautiful woman from the dangerous giant gorilla, the Great Kong." Kong pulled harder and more angrily at his chains and roared wildly. Preston looked at Jack, and they felt afraid. "We have to get these people out of here," Jack said. "He's going to break the chains." "You have to leave," Preston said to a man in front of him. "Everybody has to leave," Jack said more loudly. "Do you know that I paid $10 for these tickets?" the man said. Suddenly, the woman in the long white dress screamed. One of Kong's hands was free. People saw, but they didn't understand. Some people laughed, and other people shouted happily. "Get out of here, now!" shouted Jack to the people around him. "Go!" Again, Kong roared angrily and very loudly. Jack saw Carl's face, a child's face with wide-open eyes, but not afraid. Suddenly, Kong broke free from his chains. People started to understand. Nobody was safe. They screamed. Everybody jumped up and ran for the doors. The woman in white screamed too. Kong picked her up and threw her across the room. Jack wanted to help people, but he felt afraid too. Kong moved through the people and killed many of them with his feet. He stopped when he saw Jack. Jack saw Kong's angry eyes, and he jumped out of his way. Kong tried to find him and killed more people under his feet. Jack ran down some stairs and out the door. He ran into the center of Times Square and looked back at the theater. Suddenly, Kong pushed the walls down and jumped into the street. He looked around at the cars, the lights, and the people. But Kong didn't see Jack. He was angry and afraid in this strange world of lights and noise. He picked up a woman with yellow hair. She screamed. Jack saw and understood. He's looking for Anne. When Anne walked out of the theater, she heard screams and the sound of police cars from Times Square. She knew Kong was there. She ran. Kong picked up more women with yellow hair. When he saw their faces, he threw them down again. He killed people in their cars with his big feet. He picked up a bus and threw it out of his way. Then he walked out of Times Square and went south. Jack got into a taxi and said, "Follow him." The man said, "You can follow him, not me." He got out of his taxi, and Jack quickly drove after Kong. But when Kong saw Jack in the taxi behind him, he roared angrily. Jack quickly turned down a small street and drove south. Other cars had to move quickly out of his way. Kong was behind Jack and moved fast. Suddenly, Jack hit a wall. Kong didn't see Jack under the ruins and ran past him. Then Kong stopped and stood quietly. What did he see in front of him? "Oh, no," Jack thought. "Not her. But of course, She's here. She wants to help him. Anne ran to Kong. He looked into her eyes, and she smiled at him. Kong put out his hand and picked her up slowly and carefully. Then he carried her away into the New York City night. The police didn't want to catch Kong. They wanted to kill him. They shot at Kong. But with Anne in his hand, he climbed up onto the top of the highest stores and banks and ran. Suddenly, he stopped. Across 34th Street, he could see the Empire State Building, the tallest in the world. Below, in the street, Jack thought about Anne and his mistakes. Why didn't I tell her about my love for her? Now it's too late. It didn't have to end this way. I have to save her. I have to save our future. 100 or more men with guns were ready on the ground. Kong roared angrily down at them. A policeman shouted, "Shoot!" Jack felt sick. It can't end this way, he thought wildly. Anne will die. The men shot at the gorilla, but suddenly Kong jumped across 34th Street to the Empire State Building. Quickly, he put Anne on his back and started to climb up. Everybody's eyes were on the gorilla. Jack ran. I have to save Anne. I'll get into the Empire State Building through that door there, he thought. Nobody could stop him. Anne looked down hundreds of meters to the ground below and felt afraid. A strong, cold wind pulled at her, but she didn't scream. Kong climbed higher and higher. When he was almost at the top, he carefully put Anne down. Why are we here? Why did Jack have to save me on Skull Island? This is the worst end for everybody, she thought. She looked sadly at Kong. Kong sat down and looked across New York City. Anne thought about the mountain top in the jungle. Does he think we are safe here? Maybe. But this time he's wrong. The sun started to come up, and the sky was a pretty color. Kong looked at Anne, and she understood. Yes, it is beautiful, she said. She looked up and saw 4 airplanes with large guns. Kong looked too, and then at Anne. He roared and pushed her to the wall behind him. The airplanes were nearer now. No! She screamed. The airplanes came at Kong from the north, south, east, and west, and shot him. He roared again, and then started to climb higher. Anne watched him. He left me here because it's safer for me, she thought. But it's not safer for him. I'll climb up to him. Maybe they won't shoot when they see me next to him. She started to climb up. Kong tried to hit one of the airplanes. He tried again, and this time he hit it hard. It fell to the ground, But he fell too. He put his hand through a window and stopped his fall. But he hit the wall hard, and Anne fell from the building. Quickly, Kong put out a hand and caught her. For a minute, Anne felt safe again. The 3 other airplanes came nearer, and Kong put Anne safely inside through the window. The guns got louder and louder. Kong, badly hurt, roared louder too. He climbed higher. Suddenly, Jack arrived and saw Anne. She ran to the stairs. The guns didn't stop, and he had to jump out of the way. The airplanes went around and around over Kong's head. Kong, now at the top of the building, put out his hand and caught one of them. He threw it at one of the other airplanes, and, with a loud noise, they lit up the night sky with a great ball of fire. Anne ran up onto the top and stood between Kong's legs. More airplanes with guns came, and she screamed, "No! No!" They shot Kong again and again, and he slowly went down on the floor. Anne took one of his fingers and cried. Kong picked her up and looked at her. Then he looked to the east. A new day slowly began. He put her down, and his face changed. Now he was quiet and free. His life was at an end. He fell off the building. Anne looked down, and for a minute she wanted to follow Kong. There was no place for her in this cold world. Suddenly, she felt Jack next to her. "Anne," he said quietly. "Why are you here?" she asked. Her eyes were wet and red. His face changed. She saw a new Jack, free from his past life. "Because I love you," he answered quickly. Anne looked into Jack's eyes, and she slowly moved into his arms. They stood weak and sad, but with new hope in the morning light. 200 or 300 people in the street stood around Kong, and the newspaper men took photos of him. One newspaper man looked up. "Why did he do that? Climb up there? He couldn't run away," he said. "He was a stupid animal," said another newspaper man. "He didn't know anything." Carl looked up and said, "He knew. He couldn't have her, so he had to die."